Good morning, Claire. Thanks for making time to talk to me this morning about the new ABTA report on Tourism for Good. It's an impressive document. It's actually very long. I'm hoping we can get through a fair bit of it in the next 20 minutes. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Harold. For those of you that don't know ABTA, ABTA is the UK Travel Association, and we've been around for 70 years. We're a membership organisation with more than 1,200 members, equivalent to 4,300 travel brands, and a combined annual UK turnover of £39 billion. Our purpose is to help our members grow their businesses successfully and sustainably, helping their customers travel with confidence. And as head of sustainability at ABTA, my role is to lead the association's work with our members, destinations, customers, and the wider industry on sustainability. We recently launched Tourism for Good, a roadmap for rebuilding travel and tourism. And this report does three things. We reflect on how the devastating impact of COVID has brought into stark relief the value of tourism to holidaymakers, the UK and destinations, reminding us why tourism is so important. We look at the challenges the industry is facing, as well as what action is being taken. And we set out a roadmap for the future, how ABTA will continue to champion sustainability with our members, destinations, customers, and the wider industry. We also set out ways in which this can be supported by policies and action from the UK government. But before I go into that in more detail, I want to take a step back and think about consumers. So on the next slide, we can see that in ABTA's 2020 holiday habits research, more than half of people believe that the travel industry should open in a greener way. And as we can see from this chart, concern for most sustainability issues has not only been maintained in 2020 compared to 2019, it's actually risen. Over the last decade, we have seen that consumers have been increasingly keen to know that their holidays benefit the people and places they visit. Our research has shown us that half of people consider the sustainability credentials of their holiday provider to be important or essential when choosing a company to book with. And that's compared to only a fifth back in 2011. In addition, we know that managing sustainability improves customer satisfaction. So for example, ABTA leads Travel Eye for Accommodation, which is an internationally recognized accommodation sustainability certification program. And it helps accommodation members improve their social, environmental, and economic impacts. We've seen that sustainably certified hotels, such as those certified with Travel Eye for Accommodation, have been shown to have demonstrably higher customer satisfaction scores. And lastly, in terms of consumers, COVID may also be shaping how people want to travel. So for example, people may want to holiday closer to home or spend time in nature and outside. And all of this will have implications for sustainability. Moving on to the value of tourism. Central to the report is the belief that travel and tourism is a powerful force for good. Using the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking at the value of tourism in terms of the value to holidaymakers, in terms of health and well-being, the value of jobs and livelihoods, both in the UK, but also in destinations. And actually new research in the report shows that in destinations, the UK outbound tourism sector supports 2.7 million jobs. And we also go into this in a bit more detail, try and understand the human side behind the numbers. Interestingly, when you look at where in the world UK tourists spend the most, that list is a little bit different to where the most jobs are generated. And this is due to differences in labour intensity. So the 10 countries with the most employment includes places like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and Jamaica. And in certain destinations, the Maldives, Jamaica, Cyprus, Malta, Mauritius, Greece, Spain, and Portugal, UK holidaymakers alone make a contribution of more than 1% of national GDP. And the report describes how these destinations have been impacted by COVID. But in addition to the jobs and livelihoods, tourism has a tremendous value socially and in terms of quality of life. More and more destinations are measuring success in terms of resident satisfaction with tourism. Tourism also plays a role in the conservation of culture and nature, such as income from tourism being used to preserve cultural heritage, or the fact that in some places we've seen poaching increase without the income from the presence of tourists. At the same time, as recognizing this tremendous value of tourism, we also acknowledge that there are challenges, as we set out on the next slide. We explore how these challenges are being addressed, including case studies and examples. So looking first at managing environmental impacts, this includes climate change and decarbonisation, waste, including reducing single-use plastic, and water management. Going a little bit deeper into decarbonisation, there is an urgent need to accelerate decarbonisation in all elements of the global tourism industry, across aviation, cruise, other forms of transport such as cars and coaches, accommodation and excursions. On aviation, ABTA is a member of Sustainable Aviation, an alliance of UK airlines, airports and manufacturers. Earlier this year, the coalition made a commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and it set out how this can be achieved through a combination of demand reduction, sustainable aviation fuels, and new aircraft such as hydrogen or electric. We have been asking the government to support this decarbonisation in alignment with sustainable aviation. And the UK government has now set up its Jet Zero Council, a coalition working towards the UK's 2050 net zero target. On accommodation, we have Travelife for Accommodation, as I mentioned before. On decarbonisation, Travelife is working to develop a new emissions calculator and reporting system, and has issued new guidance for hotels on how to benchmark, measure and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, the Travelife for Accommodation certified hotel group, Valimar Riviera, they've managed to reduce their carbon emissions by more than 70% between 2015 and 2016 through initiatives such as 100% renewable energy, electricity. I want to take a moment to reflect on offsetting. Now, reduction of emissions is always preferable to offsetting. Intrepid's recent science-based carbon reduction targets are a great example of this. They made public commitments to reduce the emissions from within their own operations and their value chain. Offsetting can, for example, introduce an additional financial incentive to reduce emissions, and it plays a current role in the policy structures that we have. But any carbon offsets must be credible. And in terms of the environment, carbon reduction isn't the only issue. The report also looks at the action needed on resource use and waste management and water management. Travel and tourism needs to continue to ensure we deliver value and benefits for destinations and local communities. And by this, I mean, what impact is tourism having locally, such as local employment, infrastructure, cultural heritage, and the natural environment? Management of these impacts needs collaboration between industry, destination authorities, and communities. Destination management is essential in building a sustainable and resilient tourism industry. And it requires cross-sector engagement between relevant government bodies at the national and local level, the private sector, the third sector, and at its heart, local people. And you need structures to convene these stakeholders to work together. You need a long-term vision of success. And importantly, you need to measure success in the right way, holistically. I spoke earlier about measuring success in terms of resident satisfaction with tourism. There are a number of destinations who are factoring sustainability into their planning for recovery following the pandemic. For example, New Zealand, their tourism minister has recognised the crisis as an opportunity to rethink the entire way they approach tourism to ensure that it will make New Zealand a more sustainable place. And at a local level, for example, Milan has created new cycle paths in the city following lockdown and the related substantial drop in traffic. Or there's the Austrian ski resort that's announced plans to move away from its party reputation to focus on other markets. In terms of ensuring local people benefit, travel companies can boost the local economic impact of their operations with a range of simple measures. So local sourcing, employing local staff, using local and family-owned accommodation, or on tours and excursions, incorporating stops at local restaurants, markets, food stalls, and handicraft producers. And tour operators can also support community-based or social enterprises. The report also looks at how dependency on tourism can be reduced. When we think about tourism planning, development, and management, this needs to take account of how tourism uses the infrastructure, such as transport networks, water and electricity, or waste management. And finally, the report looks at how tourism must protect and enhance nature and biodiversity and the culture and heritage on which tourism is built and depends. Continued action is also required on human rights and animal welfare. On human rights, we look at labour rights, so addressing modern slavery and human trafficking, safeguarding children, and diversity and inclusion. Much of this is driven by legislation, such as in the UK, the Equality Act or the Modern Slavery Act. And the Modern Slavery Act requires companies with a turnover of over £36 million to have a modern slavery statement. But when it comes to tackling things like discrimination, we've seen it's not enough just to say we don't discriminate. We need a proactive approach to promoting diversity and inclusion. Animal welfare is an issue that is important to consumers. Tourism experiences can involve viewing or interacting with animals, and this can be enjoyable, educational, and provide a valuable revenue for conservation or income for local communities. However, certain activities need to be managed carefully to ensure that they don't jeopardize animal welfare, and others should be avoided altogether. So that's an overview of the sorts of challenges on sustainability that the industry is facing, but also what the industry is doing to address them. Due to the global nature of these challenges, there is more to be done, with the best outcomes being achieved through a concerted worldwide approach and learning and sharing across the industry. We know what needs to be done, we just need implementation at scale. The report sets out a roadmap for how we can embed sustainability into the recovery, underpinned by these 9 core principles. The need for tourism to be resilient, the need to recognise outbound tourism's contribution to the UK, using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework, the importance of cross-sector collaboration, the importance of specific areas such as decarbonisation, destination benefits, culture and nature, and human rights. And finally, how measurement and reporting are critical. In support of these core principles, ABTA commits to working with our members, destinations, customers, the wider industry, and the UK government to build a more sustainable industry so tourism benefits everyone. With our members, we commit to collecting data to establish an understanding of and baseline for sustainability performance across our membership and report on progress. We also commit to continuing to provide our members with the guidance, tools and resources they need to address sustainability through our long-standing Better Places programme. And also, as I mentioned before, we can support our members to manage sustainability in their supply chain with the International Sustainability Certification Scheme, TravelEye for accommodation. With destinations, ABTA commits to promoting proactive integrated destination management with both destination representatives and governments. We can facilitate dialogue between destinations and our members on sustainability, supporting sustainability certification of accommodation through TravelEye for accommodation. But we can also share examples of best practice from our experience of working with partners and destinations around the world. With customers, ABTA commits to understanding consumer attitudes, such as those figures that I shared earlier on. We can also provide customers with information and guidance to enable them to make responsible tourism choices. For example, through ABTA's annual Make Holidays Greener campaign, we have a range of tips that travel companies can use to share with their customers. Examples of how we're working with the wider industry include our membership of Sustainable Aviation that I've already mentioned, our participation in international networks such as the UN Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, and the Roundtable for Human Rights in Tourism. And finally, the UK government has a significant role to play, in particular through support for accelerating decarbonisation. Ultimately, this is a call for the industry to embed sustainability into the recovery, to ensure a responsible and resilient tourism industry, fit for the challenges we face, and also a contributor to the global good.
Claire, thanks very much for that. What strikes me is perhaps a couple of areas that it would be worth talking about in a little more detail. You refer to the need to decarbonise aviation, but the truth is that's going very slowly, isn't it? And the amount of carbon building up in the atmosphere will still be there in 2050. So waiting until 2050 to achieve carbon neutrality is not really much of a stretch target for the aviation industry.
So the roadmap that Sustainable Aviation sets out, it sets out reduction that can be happening now and what needs to happen every year out to 2050 in order to reach that goal in 2050. So clearly action needs to happen in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years to get us moving in that direction. I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing at the moment is, given the situation that aviation is currently in, there's actually less resources for investment in that transition. So we need to make sure that we don't lose the progress that we had before and ensure that we have this greener recovery that everyone's talking about.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see where the discussion on decarbonisation next week at the trade show at WTM actually ends, but there's not much evidence that progress was being made before the COVID outbreak. It's convenient now that perhaps we can blame lack of investment on COVID, but in reality, we've known about the problem for a long time. And there are a few people trying to move towards alternative fuels and hydrogen, but that's not where the mainstream industry is.
Well, I think we have a lot of mainstream players within the Sustainable Aviation Coalition, so the idea of these roadmaps from Sustainable Aviation is uniting the mainstream industry behind a really clear vision. But absolutely, we now need to see concrete action moving towards what the roadmap sets out.
Yeah, but I think part of the problem, Claire, is that whilst there is a roadmap and by 2050 it may have been achieved, that will be way too late. Progress needs to be made a lot faster. Which brings me actually to the other thing I wanted to ask you about, which is your work with destinations. Mm-hmm. Because I suspect that you and I agree that it is in the destinations that most of the impacts of tourism need to be managed, whether those are here in the UK or anywhere else in the world. But a couple of thoughts on that. One is that ABTA is not as influential, the UK is not as influential as it was when the Sustainable Tourism Initiative launched in 2001. The UK market is not very significant in many destinations anymore. So there's a problem about trying to do that without collaborating with other outbound source markets. That's the first problem. The second problem, and it's very noticeable in the report and in what you said about it, is that you quickly slide from talking about destinations through talking about destination management organizations, which are not the local government. The destination management organizations do not own the destinations. They often behave as though they do. But in reality, with COVID, we've seen a lot of councils actually objecting to the way in which tourism operates in a whole series of different ways. And I think that's long overdue. But on top of that, you've then got the problem that you slip away into talking about the Global Compact and the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the rest of it. But in reality, tourism will always be managed by the local authority or by the national park. It's never going to be managed by national government.
So yeah, picking up on a few points, that the first point you made, completely agree, that particularly in terms of the influence of the international travel industry, we need that international collaboration with destinations to amplify the voice. And so we've worked with, for example, our counterparts in the Netherlands, ANVR, and in Germany with DRV to do just exactly that. In terms of the roles of different players within the destinations, completely agree, it's a complex landscape. I think the heart of what we're saying is it needs to happen at a national level and a local level, for example. And you need those structures in place at both levels. So you need a national tourism strategy, and that national tourism strategy needs to have engagement from across government, the bits of government that are responsible for infrastructure, and so on, and the economy. But you also need to bring this to life at local level, and communities need to be a part of it. So there isn't one simple solution, but I think destination management needs to happen not just by destination management organizations. It needs to happen in multiple places, at multiple levels, and it needs different engagement, cross-sector engagement in this. So yeah, completely agree. This is not just about destination management organizations. This is about different actors coming together behind a common vision.
Yes, I think the problem is who actually speaks for the destination. And one of the principles of responsible tourism is that the destination belongs to the people who live there, not to the destination marketing organization, which is what most of the DMOs are. And I think that's partly where the tension lies. But Claire, that's not your fault that that tension exists. That's the reality that's out there. Thank you very much for that. And I wish you well with the report. I must say it's very useful when an organization like ABTA is able to pull together so much diverse information and put it in one place. So I think you're to be congratulated on what is a remarkable report. And obviously a report cannot solve the problems, but it can draw attention to them and suggest ways forward. So Claire, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, that's right.